Hey there, Road Warriors. Today on your 2014 Thor Challenger, we're going to be installing Roadmaster's rear anti-sway bar. And this is what your sway bar is going to look like once you've got it installed. And after you've got it installed, once you get out on the road, you'll notice a difference immediately. It's going to help provide a safer ride by reducing the amount of sway when going down the road. So if you've got wind hitting the side of your RV, it'll help stop that rocking motion and minimize it, making it easier for you to maintain control of the vehicle. Additionally, when you hit uneven pavement or you're parking in an RV park, it also helps to reduce that sway, making you feel like you're more in control of the vehicle you're driving. And you're not only going to feel more in control inside the driver's seat, but all of your passengers are going to be more comfortable because they're not going to be getting thrown around as much inside the motorhome. It achieves this by working in conjunction with your existing rear sway bar. This one mounts behind the axle while the other sway bar's in the front, and the bar extends across the side and will flex with the roll of the body to help bring it back to center. The bar itself is a chromoly steel with a black powder coat finish, so it's not only going to be strong, but it's going to be durable and last a long time. The poly bushings dampen the movement of the sway bar, ensuring that it's going to be smooth and quiet. We'll begin our installation at the rear of the vehicle. Just behind our rear axle, you'll see 4 bolts in the outside of the frame. We're going to be removing the 2 bottom bolts. Now you can see here that our bottom bolts are accessible and our leaf spring is down below it. We achieve that by getting our suspension to hang. So we've got our vehicle on a lift here in the shop, but if you were doing this at home, you can use your leveling jacks to raise up the back of the vehicle to get the leaf spring out of the way. And after you've got it raised up, I do recommend that you put jacks underneath the frame, just in case in the event of emergency that your leveling jacks aren't holding it, you have some extra support there. Now we're going to use a 21mm socket to remove both the lower bolts. We've got both of our bolts removed. This is what your nuts look like on the other side. You can see they've got a plate welded on them here. This plate hits against the frame, so you don't need to put a wrench on it or anything. If for whatever reason the plate does bend and you can't get it off, you may need to put a wrench on it. You use a 24mm wrench or socket to hold the nut. We're going to reinstall that hardware here right after we set our bracket in place, just like we got it here. You want the L portion to go around the frame, and we're going to use the same hardware that we took off to attach it. And we're just going to put those nuts on just like we found them on the inside. You're going to have to turn the bolt to get it started in the nut, as the weld plate's going to prevent the nut from turning. We'll then tighten them down. And then torque your hardware to the specifications found in your instructions. We'll now repeat this same procedure on the other side. Next, we'll need to remove the nuts from our U-bolts that attach the axle to the leaf springs. Before you take all these loose, I recommend that you make sure your axle is supported if it is not touching the ground. If your tire's on the ground, then you'll be okay, but otherwise it could potentially sag down. So you want to have some kind of support on there if that is the case for you. Once you've taken the necessary safety precautions and supported it, we'll use a 1 1/8 inch socket to remove the nuts. And what I like to do is, after I remove the first nut, I like to actually thread that one back on just a couple of turns, because when we take all these off, this plate here is going to want to fall down, and it's a very heavy plate, so we don't want to hurt ourselves. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, boy, these are coming off awfully easy. It's not uncommon for these to get rusted up and be very difficult to remove over time, so you may have to use a very long breaker bar to get them loose. Some spray lubricant can also assist if they're extremely tight. We're also going to have to torque these nuts when we're done, and these torque to an extremely high torque value. So if you don't have a torque wrench that exceeds 300 pounds plus, then you may want to seek assistance in getting these installed. Once they're all removed, we'll support our plate. We'll take that last nut off. Now we'll take the plate that comes in our kit that we're going to be adding to it. We're going to put it on. Our plate is going to go on in this orientation here. So you're going to have your elongated holes towards the front of the vehicle. You'll have your more pointed edge here towards the rear, and the small holes here on the side will be facing towards the center of the vehicle. So we're now going to lift it up, keeping that all supported. Slide our plate on, and then reinstall our nuts. We can now tighten down our hardware. When you tighten it down, you want to make sure you go back and forth, tightening it down evenly. With all the hardware tightened down, we'll repeat the same process on the other side, and then we'll torque all of our hardware to the specifications found in our instructions. Your bushings have a split in them to make it easy to slide it over the bar. But before we slide them on, you want to take some of the lubricant that comes in the kit, and we're going to put some on the inside. Just want to smear it around. We're going to do this to both of our bushings, and then we're going to slide it onto the bar. We'll then put a little bit inside the caps and slide those on over the bushings. We want to take the smaller bolts that come in our kit, and we're going to place a flat washer on each one of those. Makes it easier to have this hardware prepared before we hold our sway bar up there and try to put it through. We're now going to take our sway bar. We're going to drop a bolt down to our bracket on the rearmost hole on each side. You'll then lift it up where it lines up with the bracket, and then we'll put a flat washer on it followed by a nut. Then you'll want to line up your bushing bracket with your lower bracket here. Find out which hole you'll want to use, and you're going to use the exact same hardware combination through there. And now before we tighten on our hardware, we want to double check to make sure our bar is correct. You want to make sure that it's centered from side to side, and you also want to make sure that when you have it lifted up in this orientation, the middle kind of dips down just a little bit at the center like this. Now we've made sure everything's in the correct orientation and centered, we can tighten down our hardware using a 16mm wrench and an 18mm socket. We'll now install our side brackets. We'll push the bushing end of our side bracket up into the brackets we had in our frame. We'll slide the large bolts in the kit through it and put a nut on the other side. Next, take your sway bar, you're going to turn it up until the hole in the end of the sway bar eyelets line up with the holes on our side brackets. We're going to slide a bolt through and put a nut on the other side. We're going to be using the same large bolts as up top. Now we can go back and tighten down all of our large bolts using a 24mm socket and wrench. You can then go back and torque all of your hardware to the specifications found in your instructions. And that completes our installation of Roadmaster's rear anti-sway bar on your 2014 Thor Challenger.